right, Shahir Masri here. We are on the road for climate action. Today I'm really excited about our interview. We're here with world-renowned political dissident, author, and linguist Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky is an emeritus professor at MIT, but he's also more recently a laureate professor here at the Department of Linguistics at the University of Arizona, where we're so excited to join him. With that being said, it's really a privilege to be with you today, Professor Chomsky.
Glad to be with you.
So what we're doing over the last 2 months is really try to do climate outreach and awareness across the country, but also hear from experts, people in the field, and others who are very well acquainted with the impacts of climate change and the severity of the climate crisis. I wanted to ask you, you've had a long history of being outspoken about war and atrocities across the world, really speaking on behalf of protecting humanity, both domestically but importantly abroad. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, where does the issue of climate change, in your view, rank among all the issues that we sort of think about? War, nuclear proliferation, and now increasingly climate change. How do you rank climate change as a global threat?
Well, nuclear war has been a dark shadow looming over human life for over 70 years. The threat has oscillated, now it's increasing again. As I'm sure you know, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, which sets its doomsday clock every year, just after a year of Trump's administration, moved the clock to the minute hand to 2 minutes to midnight. It's the closest it's been to terminal disaster since it was set. In fact, there was one prior time in 1953 when the United States, Soviet Union exploded thermonuclear weapons. It also went to 2 minutes to midnight. Now it's moved closer. It's partly the increasing nuclear threat, partly the dire threat of climate catastrophe. And both threats are increasing. On the nuclear issue, the Trump administration, presumably under John Bolton's pressure, has announced that it will very possibly, very likely, pull out of the INF Treaty, which just opens the door to countries to produce very dangerous short-range missiles, which reduce warning time enormously, and hence escalate the severe threat of just accidental nuclear war, which has come very close many times in the past. In fact, if you look at the record, it's an absolute miracle that we've survived. So that threat's increasing. The climate issue is something that is almost indescribable. I mean, I don't think there's anything like this in human history. There aren't words to describe what's happening. The leadership understands perfectly well, not just the political leadership, but CEOs of the major banks, energy corporations. They know perfectly well that they are heading towards disaster, and they are escalating the threat. What's happening, sometimes you really can't find words for it. Like, for example, a couple of weeks ago, one of the most astonishing documents literally in human history ever appeared. It's from a bureaucracy, maybe in honor of Kafka or something like this. The Department of Transportation of the Trump administration came out with a detailed document concerning regulation of emissions and mileage conditions and so on. And they concluded there should be no regulations at all. And they had a logical argument. The argument is, we're going over the cliff anyway, and this doesn't really add much to it, so why not? Why not? They said by the end of the century, if you extrapolate, this temperature will have risen 3 or 4 degrees centigrade, and sea level skyrockets. So what's the difference? Of course, they're assuming that everyone is as criminally insane as we are. That is, that no one's going to do anything. That's the basic assumption. This barely got mentioned, but it's everywhere. Pick up the current issue of the major business journal, Bloomberg Business Week, very serious journal, issue talking about the wonders of increased fracking. It's the Permian field in Texas, New Mexico, a huge amount of fossil fuel. Now we can get to it. It's where the United States is surpassing Saudi Arabia. It's going to have they understand perfectly well what this means. Not a word. Go to the big banks. J.P. Morgan Chase, the CEO, Jamie Dimon, smart guy, perfectly well understands. He knows about the IPCC report, understands everything. They're increasing investments in fossil fuels. If you look at the record of ExxonMobil, it's really astonishing. I'm sure you know this, but the ExxonMobil scientists were in the lead and
spearheading
discovering the severe threat of global warming. This is back in the 60s and 70s when nobody was talking about it. When James Hansen made his famous revelation in 1988 about the severe dangers, ExxonMobil changed their policies towards funding skepticism about climate change, not straight denialism. They're not crazy enough to say it's not happening, but they say, well, you don't know, there's this uncertainty, that uncertainty. So as soon as they got the indication that it's going to become a public issue, they immediately tried to ensure that you could increase the danger. And it takes, say, Trump himself. He talks about how it's a hoax, but he just applied to the government of Ireland for permission to build a wall to protect the golf course from rising sea levels, appealing to climate change. So what you have is an intellectual community. This includes journals, business people, political figures, who understand perfectly well that they're racing to disaster and are saying, let's accelerate it.
In the name of profit, presumably.
In the name of short-term profit for overstuffed pockets.
Keyword short-term, right. You've previously spoken of the Trump administration and actually about Trump himself being sort of a distraction with all of the sort of extreme things he says, taking up a lot of media space. I'm wondering, what are some of the things that are taking place behind the scenes legislatively that are most concerning as it relates to the environment and climate change in particular?
Well, the most important, it's not deeply hidden behind the scenes, is just the dismantling of any effort to even address the question, like in the the Environmental Protection Agency, other agencies. You're not allowed to mention the word climate change. Any move towards regulation is being dropped, and meanwhile policies are being instituted to maximize the threat, like calling for opening the doors to ocean exploration in the Atlantic, right when we're, apart from climate change, just when we're getting new evidence about the disasters, terrible disasters in the Gulf of Mexico, which were unknown until recently, huge dead spots and so on. But point by point, that's what's happening, and on every other front as well. While Trump is performing his antics in front of the media, the real evil geniuses, Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell, are driving through legislation which is devastating to much of the population and beneficial to their real constituency, super rich corporations. The most extreme example is what they're most proud of, the tax bill. Give away to the rich, but it had the extra benefit of creating a huge deficit. So they both pointed out right away, well, we've got this big deficit, we have to cut back welfare spending. You couldn't be more frank and open about it.
Right.
But somehow Trump, as a kind of a maestro is able to keep all of this under control, and even keep his adoring crowds loving him while he's shafting them in every possible way. It's a pretty amazing trick. And in fact, the effect on public opinion is pretty shocking. So if you take the Republican Party, recent polls on climate show that about half of Republicans deny that global warming is taking place. Mm-hmm. Of the other half, a bare majority say that humans might be responsible for some of it. I mean, this is, again, indescribable.
If we're trying to get, a hold of this issue, in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and getting some serious policies across or on the table, there's different groups advocating for different things. You hear about, putting a price on carbon federally or at the state level, but then we also hear about community choice energy on the more local level. One of the things that concern me with sort of a lot of different pursuits by different groups is that perhaps the concerned climate community could get too fractionated doing a bunch of different things and maybe get nothing done. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, and if you think that there is sort of an umbrella that climate advocates or climate groups can get behind, sort of one theme or one policy measure to take to Washington, what that would be.
Well, I think all of these measures should be pressed. There should be a carbon tax. There should be a substantial move to develop and install renewable energy, everything from LED lights to solar panels to wind farms and others. And we should be beginning to think about decarbonization, and we have to recognize that you've got to terminate the use of fossil fuels. That just hasn't gotten across.
Remove some subsidies, perhaps, for fossil fuel industry as well.
They have huge subsidies, hundreds of billions of dollars a year.
And what role do you think nuclear power has in this transition away from fossil fuels to a decarbonized future?
Well, that's a difficult question. I mean, as I'm sure you know, the people who are really dedicated to this issue just differ on it. Mm-hmm. And I think it should be a last resort. There are plenty of other alternatives.
Pick the low-hanging fruit. Pick the low-hanging fruit, wind, solar, things like that.
All of these things can be developed very effectively. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you just travel around where we are now in Arizona. The sun is shining all the time. Mm-hmm. Take a look and see how many solar panels you see.
I didn't notice any in New Mexico on the way here.
Yeah, very few. And they should be everywhere. I mean, a place like Arizona could probably power half the country just from the amount of sun.
Sure.
And there are no incentives to do it. And there are cultural barriers. People just, as I say, if half of the Republican Party says it's not happening, you're not going to get solar panels put up.
Right, right.
There's a real educational, cultural problem.
What do you say to those who say it's too late for climate change?
It's never, first of all, it's not true, but if that's what you think, just say goodbye to your friends.
Do you have any advice for people like myself who are willing to dedicate their career to trying to wrestle with this problem? I just took a year sabbatical, so did Athena, to do climate outreach, climate advocacy. We're just getting started with this 3-month road tour. But do you have any advice for people such as myself? Where can we be most effective in trying to address this problem?
I think the best advice is to keep doing what you're doing. It's got to be done. We have to reach lots of people and quickly from at all levels, the general population, and somehow get the elites to recognize the monstrous crime that they're carrying out. The idea that a person can know that we're heading towards disaster and say, let's accelerate it so I can put more dollars in my pocket is simply unspeakable. We have to get to the point where this is a big headline in the newspapers every morning.
Right, I totally agree. Professor Chomsky, it was really a privilege. Thank you for being with me today. So this is a book it was just published.
This is yours?
This is mine, yeah.
Oh, great.
2 months ago, it's hot off the press. It's Beyond Debate, Answers to 50
Oh,
Misconceptions
terrific.
on Climate
Yeah.
Change. I'd love to hear what you think.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.